It was Wednesday, October 22nd. I stood in the shower, letting the warm water cascade over me. Recently, I'd been spending more time in the shower, leaning against the wall as the water flowed. Sometimes I cried, but the shower provided a private space for me to do so. Over the past few weeks, my showers had become longer, often extending by an extra 10 minutes due to my emotional outbursts. I wondered if Liz noticed the change in my routine. She seemed too preoccupied to pay much attention to me. I, on the other hand, was always observant, noticing things about her that she didn't realize. This morning, however, I wasn't crying. Today, I was heading to meet Richard Grenier. Changes were coming, and while I wasn't sure if they would be any less painful than what I had already experienced, I knew something had to give. As I dried off in the peaceful house, with the kids at school and Liz at work, I reflected on my recent conversation with Ernie Matazzolo. Ernie's office was unassuming, located in a not-so-fancy part of Cincinnati, far from the luxurious shopping centers. However, he came highly recommended as an expert in his field. Upon sitting down in his small office, Ernie began, "Mr. H., I followed your instructions exactly, even though it was unusual for a client." He then explained that he didn't use video since it was against your request. Instead, he created audio recordings from their 3 meetings and placed them on a CD for you. "Is there anything you'd like to listen to now?" I shook my head. "As I told you, Ernie, if there's any chance at all for me and Liz, I can't be carrying around in my head the sounds of the two of them together. Just summarize for me, all right? All." "Well, there's not much going on. It's just intimate moments. They don't talk much, and there's nothing overly romantic like 'if only we could be together' or 'when I've gotten a divorce.' They don't mention your name or Grenier's wife." "What do they discuss with each other?" "At first, their conversations are mainly lighthearted and flirtatious, focusing on their physical attraction and pleasure. However, once their encounters are over, they discuss logistics, such as when they can meet again. As for love, it doesn't seem to be a significant factor in their relationship, as Ernie mentioned, not that I can hear. Their encounters appear to be more about physical satisfaction than emotional connection." "Are they doing anything unusual in their relationship?" "I don't think so. I haven't heard about any exotic activities or anything. They seem to be engaged in intimate moments, but it's not uncommon. Most couples experience that." We sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't as bad as I had feared. It was painful, but it wasn't worse than I had imagined. It was simply an affair, a normal one, between a woman and a man who wasn't her husband, who wasn't me. "Thanks for your help, Ernie. What do I owe you?" I wrote him a check, almost $8,000, without a second thought, and he pulled out 3 manila envelopes. "Here they are, just like you asked. The first envelope has a dozen photos of them entering and leaving a motel door. The second envelope contains about 4 dozen photos of them in more intimate moments, all sealed up with tape. The third envelope has 1 intimate photo, with both their faces clear. I've also got the negatives and a copy of the audio CD." "Thank you, Ernie," I said, getting up to leave. "Wait," I added. "What did you find out about Grenier?" Ernie grinned, a subtle expression. "It seems our colleague has a reputation for being quite friendly with the ladies. Betsy, my assistant, mentioned it to me. She heard from a few people at his company that he's quite popular among the female employees." He added, "However, he appears to be cautious. His wife is an heiress, with a fortune of around $80 million, and he doesn't want to jeopardize that." As I drove to Grenier's office, my thoughts drifted back to the past few months. The first inkling of trouble I noticed was in early August, about 3 months prior. After a challenging year, our family faced numerous hardships due to Carly's leukemia diagnosis. As her parents, we focused all our energy on supporting her and her sister Christina, putting aside work, social life, and our relationship to prioritize their well-being. By the previous summer, fortunately, Carly's condition improved. She was recovering her energy and growing her hair back, with a 90% chance of being fully cured. We received this uplifting news in mid-June and commemorated it with a week at Disney World. Exhausted and overjoyed, Liz and I allowed the kids to enjoy every ride, indulge in all the treats, and stay up as long as they wished. It was a moment I would always treasure. Liz and I faced a difficult time, affecting our relationship the most. As life returned to normal, I resumed my work as an economic analyst in Cincinnati, while Liz managed the human resources at a local medical center. Both of us were eager to catch up and had been overwhelmed by months of stress and anxiety. In hindsight, we realized we hadn't given our marriage the attention it deserved. In early July, Liz had a deposition for a lawsuit involving the medical center. She mentioned that Richard Grenier, the center's attorney, was tall, good-looking, and very skilled in handling the legal aspects of her testimony. Over the next few weeks, Liz had 2 more meetings with Grenier to discuss some details. After that, she didn't talk about him anymore, and it seemed like their interactions had ended. Liz continued seeing him, but their meetings gradually shifted from legal discussions to something else. She stopped sharing any information about their encounters with me. Every August, we spent our 2-week vacation at a cabin on Lake Michigan, enjoying a relaxed and romantic time. The girls would play all day, and after they were asleep, Liz and I would reconnect physically, making up for the lack of intimacy during our busy year. This vacation, however, felt different. It was hard to pinpoint the exact reason, but there was a noticeable change. Our love-making frequency remained the same, and Liz's interest didn't seem to wane on the surface. She remained affectionate and not hesitant in any way. He noticed she seemed less present during their intimate moments and other times. Concerned, he wondered what was going on in her mind. Despite his attempts to ask, she always pulled her focus back to him, attributing it to her recovery from the past year. Frustrated, he missed the connection with his wife and hoped things would improve over time, considering the emotional toll of their daughter's cancer battle. By mid-September, the situation worsened instead of improving. Liz appeared constantly stressed and uncomfortable around me. Her face often displayed a haunted expression as she stared out the window, unaware of my gaze. She became more forgetful than ever, sometimes forgetting to be home in time to prepare dinner. We took turns cooking, or going out on Saturdays to run errands, and returning without the dry cleaning she intended to pick up. By then, I was genuinely concerned. I spent a lot of time contemplating her behavior and what it might imply. While affair crossed my mind as a possibility, it seemed absurd. Our frequency of intimacy remained consistent, with a couple of times a week, which was average for us since our daughters were born. On some evenings, Liz displayed more enthusiasm than usual, even a little wild and demanding. I enjoyed those nights at the time, but they only heightened my worry when I thought about them later. Was she extra excited due to some reason? Or guilty? What was truly happening? I occasionally checked in with her, asking about work issues, health, or if I'd done something to upset her. Her response was always a firm, "No, everything's fine, just a bit tired." She'd give me a hug and kiss, but it only made me more concerned. On September 26th, her birthday party with 10 friends, I asked Liz about a hospital lawsuit and Richard Grenier. She looked pale and asked, "Who?" I looked at her, my expression questioning. She smiled sheepishly and admitted, "Oh, I completely forgot about that. The lawyer who helped me with my case from last summer, I haven't talked to him in a while." She paused. "We met a couple of times after the case, but I think he's done with me now." She turned back to the dishes, and we fell silent for a moment. Then she abruptly changed the subject, asking about our gutters and if I'd called the yard guy to clean them out. The sudden shift in conversation caught me off guard and left me feeling uneasy. However, I didn't confront her about it. Her attempt to forget about the lawyer was disconcerting, and I had to figure out how to handle the situation. That night, while she was asleep, I discreetly searched her purse. There was nothing alarming inside, but I did notice a puzzle. Her call log had no signs of anything suspicious. I specifically checked for a certain office number and didn't find it. In her datebook, there was a time and place noted for the deposition on July 8th, and 2 other entries for meetings with Grenier. After that, no more information about Grenier. However, there were 3 instances where things she'd written down had been carefully erased. It was impossible to determine what had been there before. Since then, nothing out of the ordinary has occurred. One restless night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep due to my concerns. The next day, a friend recommended Ernie Matazzolo to me. On October 3rd, Ernie called with blunt words, revealing my spouse's affair with a lawyer named Grenier. While it didn't shock me, it left me heartbroken. After an hour, I called Ernie back, asking him to continue investigating. I requested audio recordings of their meetings and photos of them entering and exiting their rendezvous spots, as well as images of their intimate moments. Ernie agreed to obtain the photos, and we discussed the timing and his fee. Richard Grenier worked on the top floor of a prestigious office building in the city. His enthusiastic secretary informed me that he was extremely busy and couldn't meet without an appointment. I politely smiled, took a business card from my wallet, and wrote a brief message on the back. "On my way to show some photos to your boss. I'll wait 5 minutes." I handed the card to the secretary and asked her to deliver it to Mr. Grenier. To my surprise, she returned within minutes, her expression revealing a hint of irritation. "Mr. Grenier will see you now." Entering his office, I was greeted with a warm smile and a firm handshake from Mr. Grenier. His friendly demeanor hinted at an unknown outcome. "Mr. Hendricks, how are you? Please come in and have a seat." I greeted him warmly. He looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. He was tall, around 6'2", and had a striking appearance. His strong, tanned face and piercing blue eyes were undeniably attractive. I sat down, trying to hide my apprehension. I hoped he would show some signs of nervousness. To my surprise, he maintained his composure well. No tapping or fidgeting, just a steady smile. After about 30 seconds, he finally spoke. "Well, Mr. Hendricks, how can I help you?" "Mr. Grenier," I said softly, "my wife is Liz Hendricks, and right now I have your attention in my grasp. How much I reveal is entirely up to you." He remained silent, but his eyes widened slightly. With a calm voice, he said, "I'm afraid I don't understand." "You've been supporting Liz," I said, still maintaining a low tone. "I have evidence, and I believe that this evidence could lead to the loss of your position, your job, and access to Liz's financial support." His eyes darted towards the manila envelopes on my lap, but he continued to deny any knowledge of the situation. This unexpected turn of events was proving to be more engaging than anticipated. I held onto the envelope for a moment before silently passing it to him. He opened the first set of pictures, scanning them quickly. Relief washed over him as he realized they only showed him and Liz entering and exiting a meeting room. "These don't show anything incriminating," he said. I revealed the location, the Chesterton Motor Court, on Route 52 in Riverview Heights. "A bit cheap for your taste, don't you think?" He tried to dismiss me, standing up and saying, "These photos aren't proof of anything, Mr. Hendricks." I handed him another envelope, and he hesitantly pulled out the single photograph inside. Studying it, he looked increasingly uneasy before sliding it back in and sitting down. Running his hands through his hair, he looked unhappy and troubled. "I've got a few more like this one," I mentioned, "and they're all in secure locations." We sat in silence, each lost in thought. "What do you need?" he asked eventually. "How long has it been happening?" I inquired. "And why?" He chuckled, but it lacked warmth. "The reason is simple. Your wife is stunning, if you haven't noticed. Have you seen my wife?" I shook my head, and he continued. Well, you can imagine. My wife Liz is more my type. She's beautiful, much more to my taste." "For how long?" "It took about a month to get close to her. I was patient and subtle throughout the summer, maintaining a professional relationship at first. She would often mention her love for you, but eventually she—" "Stop," I said. "I have my answer." Despite the difficult situation, he couldn't completely hide his smug grin. It seemed like he enjoyed the challenge of manipulating someone like me. Perhaps the thrill of deceiving unsuspecting people added to the excitement of the situation, not just the act of being intimate with her. "You need to end things with her right now. She's great, but it's time to move on. I know you've done this before." He studied me. "What happens next?" "If you call her, I walk out of here. If I'm lucky, I don't show the photos to your law firm's managing partner or your wife." "If I call her, you'll give me the photos?" "No chance, Rich. You have two choices. Break up with Liz, and there's a chance your life won't crumble. Don't break up with Liz, and your happy life as Richard Grenier will be over in the next few hours." He stared at me, filled with anger and disappointment. Then he picked up the phone. Richard Grenier called, asking to speak with Miss Hendricks. He heard Liz laughing on the phone, and she mentioned they were both unbelievable. Richard hesitated, and Liz wondered if something was wrong. He assured her it wasn't about her, but that their relationship had run its course, like a song that had to cool down. He asked her not to cry, as they both knew it was a matter of time. "Of course there isn't anybody else. What kind of sleazy jerk do you think I am?" He paused, then added, "But it took two of us to make this happen. I didn't force you into this, remember?" She responded, "Listen, there's no need to yell. We both know why we're here." After a moment, he ended the call. "She hung up on me," he said, his face serious now, free of any smugness. "How long would it have lasted?" I asked, assuming this wasn't his first time. "A couple more months, 2 or 3 maybe. She was—" I cut him off. "I don't need to hear any more." We stared at each other in silence. He wanted me to leave, but also knew I held the power. He couldn't just throw me out. "You must avoid contacting Liz at all costs. No phone calls, no emails, no letters, no visits, nothing. Do you understand?" He nodded, eyeing me carefully. "If she reaches out, disregard her messages. If she visits, don't acknowledge her. This is permanent, Richard. I'm serious." He nodded again. "What about the photos?" "You'll have to rely on my goodwill," I replied, standing up. He stood as well. As I turned to leave, I added, "One more thing." I stepped back toward him and delivered a powerful punch to his groin. He groaned and collapsed to the floor behind his desk. I approached him, observing him lying on his side, gasping in pain, his face contorted with discomfort. I waited patiently as the pain subsided and his breathing returned to normal. Then, I gently nudged him, prompting him to get up and leave the office. In the evening, Liz was busy preparing dinner. As I entered the kitchen, she was setting the table and working with 3 pots on the stove. I greeted her with a hug and asked, "Hi, honey, how's everything?" She replied, "Oh, fine, just a long day. The girls are watching something on TV." I asked if she'd like a glass of wine, and we continued our evening together. Her eyes appeared weary, her face a mix of sadness. It seemed she had been crying, as her eyes were red, but she had carefully washed her face and applied makeup. I would have missed it if I hadn't been looking closely. Dinner proceeded as usual, surprisingly so, given the challenges of our respective days. The girls chatted nonstop about school life, disliked teachers, boys occupying the playground, and upcoming birthday parties. Their lively conversations helped maintain a sense of normalcy. Despite the challenges, life with my daughters brought happiness. Even during the tough month, their presence made me smile and laugh. Thankfully, Carly recovered. We continued our routine, helping with baths, reading stories, and discussing Halloween costumes. It felt normal, yet special. Liz couldn't sleep after everyone else did. She fidgeted, turning on the TV and browsing channels before turning it off. She attempted to read her book, but only managed a few pages before giving up. Downstairs, she tidied the kitchen and unloaded the dishwasher. When she returned upstairs, her husband asked, "Honey, is everything all right?" He didn't want to pry, but he didn't want her to feel alone in her restlessness. "It's fine," she said, walking past me towards the bathroom in her nightgown. "A few annoying work issues are just distracting me." I decided not to push it. We turned off the lights, she gave me a brief goodnight kiss, and then moved away from me. I wondered which of us would struggle to fall asleep. It turned out to be me. Within minutes, I could hear her gentle breathing. It took almost an hour before I was finally able to drift off to sleep. Over the next days and weeks, I closely observed Liz. I had a goal in mind. I wanted her to return to me. I wished for her to understand the incredible treasure she had, with me and the girls, and to recognize the terrible error she had made. I hoped she would realize how fortunate she was that it had all ended and her marriage remained strong. I longed for her to love me entirely once more, just as she did before Grenier, before Carly's leukemia, before our lives crumbled apart. However, I couldn't predict the outcome. Despite my attentive observation, I didn't notice any significant change in Liz right away. She continued to appear preoccupied and would stare out the window thoughtfully. The same sense of unhappiness would occasionally radiate from her, but she would dismiss it if I inquired about her feelings. During the first week, we shared intimate moments, but I noticed a difference when we were together in the missionary position. Liz kept her eyes closed, unlike her usual smiley demeanor. I wondered if she was hiding her emotions or pretending I was someone else. On the 9th day after visiting Grenier, Halloween arrived. The girls were filled with excitement, and we spent the evening trick-or-treating. While I accompanied them, Liz stayed behind to hand out candy to the young visitors at our home. On a lively weekend night, the girls were full of holiday excitement and sugar. They stayed up until almost 11 p.m., but luckily, it was a weekend. Liz and I shared a grin as we finally got them settled into bed. I was reading in bed when Liz climbed in beside me. After turning off the light, she asked, "Can we just snuggle tonight? I'm not in the mood for sex." I agreed, and she moved closer, resting her head on my neck. We enjoyed the warmth and comfort of each other's embrace, and after a while she whispered, "I'm sorry." "I haven't been there for you lately, and I'm sorry," Liz admitted. "We've had a lot going on, like Carly's illness, and it's taken a toll on all of us. I know I haven't been as present as I should have been, and I'm sorry for that." I listened, trying to make sense of her partial explanation. I knew Liz, and I could tell she was being honest. Still, there was something she wasn't mentioning, her relationship with Grenier. "Thank you, Liz," I replied. "I've missed you, and wondered if it was something I did." Liz quickly interrupted. "No, no, you've been amazing, so patient, kind, and supportive. You deserve so much better, and I promise I'm going to make it up to you." She hugged me tightly. It felt like a challenge to be around Liz. Every moment I questioned if I would let my anger and pain take over, or if I would stick to the path I had carefully chosen. I knew I had to stay on that path, as it was the only way to save our marriage. It was incredibly difficult, but I persevered. "That sounds good to me," I said, sharing a gentle kiss with her in the darkness. I didn't dare say anything else, unsure of the right words. The following night, we made love. It was sweet, but tentative, different from how it had been for a while. Liz seemed unsure of herself, eager to please me but also afraid. It was as if we didn't know each other that well and were worried about making a mistake. Liz seemed to be growing more at ease around me each day. The laughter that had been a defining aspect of our relationship from the beginning, the jokes and light-hearted teasing we shared, began to resurface. 2 weeks after Halloween, we experienced the most passionate moment we'd had in quite some time. After spending the day raking leaves and tending to the yard, I took a shower to freshen up before bed. To my surprise, Liz joined me in the shower. It was an exhilarating experience to witness her taking me in, looking up at me as she swallowed my seed. Afterwards, we quickly dried off and continued to play in the bedroom. I teased her gently, making her giggle and squirm. Then she playfully pulled me into a 69 position, and when I was ready again, she rode me in a fun, light-hearted cowgirl style until we both laughed and enjoyed the moment. Over the next few months, different aspects of our relationship returned to normal at different rates. Being parents together came back first, as we were already in sync with the kids. Even during the challenging times, Liz remained fully involved with the children, perhaps even more so as a way to make up for any distance she felt in our relationship. Next, we couldn't ignore the impact on our relationship. While our time together didn't significantly decrease, it was clear that Liz's enthusiasm for intimacy had dwindled. She still made an effort and occasionally initiated our moments of closeness, but the emotional connection was absent. It felt more like a casual encounter than the intimate bond we once shared. At times, it seemed Liz's reactions were exaggerated, or even feigned, to maintain the illusion of a fulfilling relationship. After Halloween, their connection grew stronger. As time passed, they both rediscovered their passion for each other. The lovemaking became more intense and genuine, reminiscent of their early days before having children. They shared a newfound excitement and desire, proving that their love was real and unwavering. Between autumn and early winter, our relationship grew stronger, with us connecting more frequently in the bedroom. This newfound intimacy brought us closer together, and we were able to rediscover the passion we once shared. After a period of uncertainty, our lovemaking improved, and we both felt more connected than ever. As time went on, our day-to-day intimacy took longer to fully return. However, our lovemaking continued to thrive. It seemed that our trust and understanding were slowly rebuilding, allowing us to move past the challenges we faced. With each passing day, Liz's confidence grew, knowing that her marriage was stronger than ever, and she could fully embrace her role as my wife once again. Even after we seemed to have moved on, about 6 months later, I still struggled with my anger, hurt, and resentment. There were rare days when I didn't think about wanting to confront her actions. I found myself imagining wrapping my fingers around her neck, choking the life out of her for betraying me. How could she be with that man, not just once, but repeatedly, for weeks on end? How could she share intimate moments with him, only to return home and act like the loving wife she pretended to be? How could she continuously lie, disregarding the solemn vows we took during our marriage ceremony? My thoughts would spiral, and I couldn't help but dwell on the pain. I made a decision, believing it was the right path to my goal. Despite the challenges, I pushed forward, sometimes shedding tears in private. Over time, things improved. My wife returned to her loving self, but it took me longer to fully trust her. I knew she wanted to be with me, and her feelings were genuine. Years after rekindling our love, my husband and I found happiness in our marriage once again. It had taken time and overcoming challenges, but we were finally content. One Sunday in April, while reading the style section of the Cincinnati Enquirer, I came across an article that caught my attention. It featured a local lawyer, Richard Grenier, who was about to be named Man of the Year. Seeing his face in the paper, I couldn't help but recall our past and the journey we had taken to reach this moment. Liz was in the yard, gardening with the girls, so I took the opportunity to read the article. The Ladies' Auxiliary of the JC's Foundation planned to honor Grenier for his many contributions to local charities in Cincinnati. A $250 per person fundraising dinner would be held in his honor at the end of May, with the funds benefiting the Boys and Girls Club, one of Grenier's supported causes. Though I hadn't thought about that man in a while, the article showed I still had unresolved feelings towards him. I folded the style section and threw it away, not wanting Liz to see it, and made a mental note to call Ernie Matazzolo. "I don't understand, Mr. H," he said. "You have enough pictures of that man with your wife. Why spend more money to get more?" "Because, Ernie, I want to put an end to this once and for all. I plan to send the photos and recordings to his wife and possibly even his law firm. There will be a big public scandal, and with luck, my wife's name won't be involved," he sighed. "Well, Mr. H, I'll gladly take your money, but I think you're not thinking clearly." It took him less than 3 weeks. He captured stunning images of Grenier and Mrs. Athena Wallace, a couple enjoying a leisurely stroll in the park. The photographs were innocent and wholesome, showcasing their friendly relationship. Even better, they had met through a shared interest in community service, so there were no ethical concerns. I've never been happier about spending $6,000 in my life. I had Ernie share the photos, and a heartfelt letter to the heavyweight Mrs. Grenier, to Mr. Wallace, to the managing partner of Grenier's law firm, and to the Cincinnati Enquirer. The results were beyond all my hopes. Cincinnati Enquirer, May 5th. Charitable fundraiser canceled. The Ladies' Auxiliary unexpectedly canceled Grenier's dinner, leaving the community curious about the reason. Cincinnati Enquirer, May 11th. Prominent Cincinnati firm faces legal challenge. City Councilman Bernard Wallace initiated a suit against Parker and Meadoff, accusing them of legal misconduct. The firm remained silent on the matter. Cincinnati Enquirer, August 18th. City Councilman Wallace's marriage ends. Bernard Wallace's divorce announcement brought attention, as a well-known local lawyer was mentioned as the alleged third party. Cincinnati Enquirer, September 10th. Grenier departs from firm. Parker and Meadoff announced Richard Grenier's departure from the company due to unspecified misconduct. Grenier could not be reached for comment. Cincinnati Enquirer, November 11th. Lawsuit resolved at Parker and Meadoff. The firm reached a financial settlement with Bernard Wallace in his lawsuit against the company. Details of the agreement remain undisclosed. Cincinnati Enquirer, December 2nd. City Council bans firm from contracts. The City Council unanimously passed a bill introduced by Councilman Bernard Wallace, prohibiting the law firm of Parker and Meadoff from working with the city for 5 years. Misconduct allegations were briefly mentioned in the third paragraph. Cincinnati Enquirer, December 29th. Local lawyer to relocate amid scandal. Anonymous sources report that Richard Grenier, implicated in the Parker and Meadoff scandal, is leaving the area. He faces a disciplinary hearing and potential disbarment. The article also covers his recent divorce from Elizabeth Grenier, a Vanderbilt family descendant. I decided to keep the newspapers off the kitchen table, avoiding any articles about Richard Grenier. Liz didn't read the paper daily, and that wasn't the main goal. I wanted to avoid the man who had captured her interest. We never discussed him, and it seemed like she hadn't heard or read anything about him, as his name never appeared in the headlines. Life moved forward, and we found peace in our own way. Life was good, and it remained that way until the girls turned 17 and 15. They were healthy, athletic, and excelled in soccer and basketball. They got good grades and mostly kept their parents informed of their whereabouts. The family felt truly blessed. In April, a new staff member named Tom K. Bernardo joined the medical center, and for a few weeks, Liz shared stories about him with her husband. Tom seemed to think he was quite the catch, flirting with several women at the office, including Marcia, who had been asked out on 3 dates by Tom. "What's he like?" I inquired, feeling a bit uneasy. Trust in Liz had vanished long ago, never to return. "Well, he's not bad looking, I suppose. A bit rugged, with a strong jaw and dark eyes. But honestly, he's so full of himself and pushy. He acts like he thinks a simple glance from him would make a woman swoon." Liz continued, "Several of the senior staff are getting irritated with him." Over the next month, I heard more stories about Tom K. Bernardo. "Not just Tom," he insists, my wife added. "He's becoming a problem around here, not just a joke. His pushy behavior towards the women he works with is getting on everyone's nerves." Liz suddenly stopped talking about Bernardo. When I inquired about him, she dismissed him with a casual wave and mentioned they were no longer on the same compensation working group. I pressed further about his behavior towards other staff members, but she only responded, "I haven't heard anything." She seemed eager to change the subject, so I let it be. However, I couldn't help but worry and watch Liz closely, as she appeared to be repeating her previous pattern of behavior from her relationship with Richard Grenier. Liz seemed preoccupied lately. Even the kids noticed it during dinner. They teased their mom about being lost in thought. Carly joked about Alzheimer's, and everyone laughed, including Liz, who managed a weak smile. But it was clear something was bothering her. Over the next few weeks, Liz grew more distant, but remained affectionate. They still made love, and sometimes she seemed as passionate as ever. She continued to show interest in their lives, but there was something different. Occasionally, she returned home late, around 8 p.m., after attending meetings. She occasionally took private phone calls in the den with the door closed. Although I knew some calls were from female colleagues, the identity of the others remained unknown. One evening, she arrived home looking distracted and worried. I offered a hug, but she requested a shower first. Disregarding her protests, I embraced her, holding her close and inhaling the familiar scent of her hair. She hadn't showered since the morning, but she didn't carry any scent of a man or anything else, just her natural scent. She went to the bedroom afterward. Later, in the kitchen, Liz made a sandwich while I asked, "Liz, is everything okay? You've been different lately. I miss our usual conversations." She looked alarmed and replied, "No, it's just work. Meetings have been late and intense. The director or assistant director insists on our presence, but that's it." She smiled, hoping I was satisfied. I pretended to be, but that night, after she went to bed, I stayed up in the living room, pondering if it was time to call Ernie Matazzolo. I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Liz were cheating on me again, our marriage was over. It was with that thought in my head that I finally went up to bed. 4 days later, everything changed. On her way out of the house after breakfast on Monday, Liz said, "Oh, sweetie, I've got another meeting tonight. I may not be home until 9 or so. Is it all right if you feed yourself and the kids?" She didn't wait for my reply and blew me a kiss, heading for her car in the garage. Something inside me snapped, and I rushed after her. As she got into her minivan, I jumped into the passenger seat and glared at her, while she looked at me in surprise. "No, it's not all right. Something's going on that you're not telling me about, and I want to know what it is, Alan said, his voice filled with frustration. She responded calmly. Alan, it's just a late meeting with the senior staff. I don't understand why you're so upset. Maybe you don't realize how many late meetings you've been to recently, or how distracted you've been with the kids, Alan insisted. You're not being straight with me, Liz. Her anger was evident, but she didn't try to hide it. For Christ's sake, Alan, when have I ever given you reason not to trust me? Just as she asked the question, an unexpected explosion occurred inside Alan's head. All his years of self-control vanished in an instant, leaving him angry and confused. Don't spread rumors about me and Richard Grenier, I exclaimed, upset. And if I hear you're involved with this Bernardo person, our friendship will be over. Angry, I got out of the car and shut the door. I glanced back at Liz through the window. Her face was pale, shocked, and motionless, her mouth slightly open. She didn't say anything as I went back inside the house. I paced around the kitchen, my heart racing with anger, my mind filled with thoughts of betrayal. How could she, lying and cheating once more? It took over 20 minutes before I could regain my composure enough to acknowledge my mistake. I had inadvertently shared the secret that had helped Liz and me rebuild our marriage. In doing so, I had undone all my efforts to move past her affair with Grenier and get my life back on track. Feeling drained, I made my way to work with little motivation. Throughout the day, I struggled to focus, my thoughts constantly circling back to the unhappy future that awaited us. Was everything about to be lost, even after so much time had passed? Would Carly and Christina have to endure a divorce? Partly, I felt a deep sadness. Sadness for my daughters, for myself, and even a little for Liz. But mostly, as the day went on, I felt a growing anger. How could she do that again? I had put in so much effort to keep our marriage strong, and she just kept letting me down. By late afternoon, I knew I couldn't go home. I couldn't face her, couldn't have a calm conversation with her. So, I called Christina and told her we should have dinner without me. Instead, I went to the Hyatt, checked into a room, and ordered a sandwich and a drink from room service. I spent the rest of the evening watching a series of light-hearted movies until it was almost midnight. I returned home, discreetly packed a suitcase with essentials, and returned to the hotel. Thankfully, Liz slept soundly, unaware of my movements in the dimly lit room. I resisted the urge to wake her up and express my frustration. The following workday was challenging, my anger growing with each hour, and my focus diminishing. I turned off my cell phone and set my office line to voicemail, accumulating 7 messages by 4 p.m. 3 were from Liz, and I forced myself to listen to the first one. In a shaky voice, she said, "Honey, are you okay? I'm really sorry about Richard. I didn't know you knew him. I promise there's nothing going on with Tom Bernardo or anyone else. Please believe me. Honey, please come home so we can talk. I'm so—" a heavy sob. "I'm so sorry. Please, please come home." The other 2 messages were similar. I sighed, deleting them. She was so sorry. How nice for me. It was my turn to prepare dinner, and I knew the girls couldn't go hungry. I grabbed 2 pizzas and a large Greek salad from Giovanni's and rushed home at 5:30, anticipating Liz wouldn't be back yet. I spent a few minutes quickly eating and playfully chatting with the girls, then informed them I had to return to work and left the house. Another night of frustration and solitude awaited me at the Hyatt. By the end of the following day, my 5th away from home, there were 5 more tearful and apologetic messages from Liz, each one insisting she wasn't involved with Bernardo. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to listen to her, see her face, or even think about her. So I sent her a text message. "Oh, really? And I'm supposed to believe you why, exactly?" Then I turned off my cell phone and went back to the Hyatt. By Thursday, day 4 of my absence from the house, I knew something had to change. I was overtired, emotionally raw, and missed my daughters terribly. But facing Liz felt like it would make me explode. I considered picking up the girls and taking them out for dinner, without Liz. At around 2:30, a middle-aged man I vaguely recognized entered my office. "Mr. Hendricks," Peter said. "I'm a lawyer at the medical center. We've met before at some social events." I recognized him and invited him to sit down. "May I close the door?" he asked, and I agreed. I can't force you to keep this conversation confidential, Peter explained, but I hope you'll understand why I'm asking. Your wife requested this meeting. At the healthcare facility, there's a sensitive matter concerning Tom K. Bernardo. It appears that there might have been a misinterpretation of the situation. I'll outline the details, but kindly maintain discretion. The narrative I am about to present is quite astonishing. Bernardo has been alleged to have engaged in inappropriate conduct towards several female colleagues at the institution, and in one instance, he has been accused of physical misconduct. Danielson and a dedicated team, including 2 women who report to Liz, are working tirelessly to gather evidence against him. It seems that Bernardo may have parted ways with a previous employer due to similar allegations. The challenge was that he was related to the junior senator from Indiana, and everyone was concerned about the possible fallout if the situation wasn't managed correctly. So Peter and his legal team were being cautious and discreet in gathering affidavits and evidence before involving the police. That's what kept Liz busy in late meetings, and that's why she seemed preoccupied and distant for several weeks. After Danielson finished his story, I sat in silence for a moment. At first, I felt relieved and hopeful. Thank goodness she wasn't cheating again. Maybe we could truly work things out after all. But my excitement didn't last long. Why couldn't she have shared this story, or at least a little bit of it, with me? Didn't she trust me enough to keep it a secret? For that matter, how did I know that Danielson wasn't just telling me a tall tale? He and Liz were co-workers and knew each other well. Maybe he was just doing her a favor. Why didn't Liz tell me this? I asked him. Or some of it, at least. He half smiled apologetically. I asked her not to share anything, Mr. Hendricks. We were all a bit, well, nervous, I suppose. So I requested that no one talked about this, even to their spouses, until it was made public. And when will that be? I asked, trying to hide my sarcasm. Next Monday, he said earnestly. We've finally prepared everything, and we hope to make an arrest by Monday afternoon. There wasn't much more to discuss. I thought for a moment, then agreed to keep the matter confidential. Thank you, he said, standing up. I apologize if this situation has caused any tension between you and your wife. She's been feeling a lot of pressure because several of the victims are close friends of hers. We'll all be relieved when the police take over and Bernardo is no longer part of the workplace. As I entered the house that night, Liz stood in the foyer, wearing an apron and looking anxious. Dark circles surrounded her eyes, and her entire body seemed tense. I assumed I appeared just as exhausted. Hi, Alan, she greeted me, moving in for a hug, but my expression stopped her. She just stared at me, concerned. Hello, Liz, I replied, heading to the closet to hang my coat. Are the girls home? Yes, they're upstairs on their computers, she responded, as I walked into the kitchen. The aroma of dinner filled the air, and the table was already set. I poured myself a beer and took a seat at the counter. Did Peter Danielson contact you? She inquired, her voice revealing her unease. Yes, he visited me today. Liz stirred the pasta, waiting for me to continue. I hope he reassured you about the situation with Bernardo. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. I sighed. Well, I heard his side of the story, but I'm not entirely convinced. He did talk about the sexual harassment and the complicated case, but I'll believe it when I see it in the news. Liz looked surprised, but I didn't care. After a moment of silence, she asked, Are you coming back home? I'm here for now, he replied. My suitcase is in the trunk, and I'll get it later when the kids are asleep. He inquired about the children. How are they doing? I told them you were working late at the office on a big project, she said. I don't think they believed me, but I didn't want to explain more yet. She looked at him with tears on her cheeks, pleading, Alan, we need to talk. About Richard Grenier and everything else. I'm so sorry. I never thought you'd find out. She cried quietly for a moment before continuing their conversation. She looked at me, insisting, I never did anything with Tom Bernardo or any other man. I swear it. I hesitated, unconvinced. Dinner was an odd mix of amusement and strangeness. The girls, teenagers themselves, were curious and teased me, asking about my age, my tie, and my lack of exercise. I enjoyed their playful jabs, understanding it was their way of reconnecting. With their lively energy and stories, I was able to avoid engaging with Liz, who seemed distant. The girls' focus on their own conversations made it easy for me to remain detached without drawing attention. After dinner, I spent time with my two daughters, discussing their school and social lives and enjoying their company. Later, when they went to their rooms, I unpacked my suitcase, changed into pajamas, and went to bed. I didn't speak to Liz, who was in the bathroom wearing a nightgown, brushing her hair. She watched me cautiously, and when I was about to turn off the light, she asked, "Alan, can we talk?" I replied, "I don't think there's anything to discuss," and turned away from her. "But honey, we need to." "When I see Tom Bernardo's face in the newspaper," I said, interrupting her, "and I read all about how he's been arrested, then I'll be ready to talk to you. Until then, I'm back because I miss the girls." With that, I turned out the light. Just before sleep took over, I heard her softly crying. For the next few days, Friday through Monday, I did my best to be my usual self around Carly and Christina. I think I managed well, though they must have noticed the tension between Liz and me. Liz and I had a strained relationship, with tension often rising whenever we interacted. I maintained a cold, detached demeanor, answering her questions with minimal words and making it clear I wanted little to do with her. Liz's face expressed a mix of helplessness and misery, but it only fueled my anger further. I thought to myself, "You brought this on, Liz. Your actions have driven a wedge between us." One Tuesday morning, I found myself in the kitchen, wearing a bathrobe and brewing coffee. Liz entered from the front porch, holding the Cincinnati Enquirer newspaper. She silently handed it to me, positioning the front page so I could see the headline, "Medical Center Administrator Arrested." There, in black and white, was a photograph of Bernardo, a file image. I picked up the paper and read the article attentively. Allegations of harassment and battery, 4 victims, 9 charges filed. Suspended from the hospital, he had retained Granato and Greevy, a well-known Cincinnati law firm, to defend him. He proclaimed his innocence, attributing it to a misunderstanding. Colleagues from the hospital provided anonymous quotes, expressing shock and disbelief. He was such a kind person, no one would have anticipated it. I set the paper down and looked at Liz, who was waiting for my reaction. "It seems the accusations are true," I said thoughtfully. "That man appears to be a despicable individual. Do you know anything about the victims and their current situation?" To my astonishment, her face fell, and she began to cry. She hid her face with her hands, and soon I heard loud, heartbreaking sobs. For a brief moment, my anger and resentment melted away. I moved to the chair next to Liz and softly guided her into my embrace, allowing her to rest her head on my shoulder as she wept for several minutes. When she finally calmed down enough to look at me, her face still wet from tears, she confessed, "I was terrified you'd never speak to me again. I didn't know what to do." She blew her nose and wiped her eyes with a napkin. Sitting up straight, she looked into my eyes and said, "Alan, I didn't have anything to do with Bernardo. I swear it. I only helped Alexa, Diane, and the others when that guy harassed them. They've been really shaken up, especially Diane. The meetings were about that, and that's why I've been so preoccupied." "I know. I wish you had told me about it, but I know Danielson asked you not to." The room fell silent. The tender moment seemed to vanish, leaving tension in its place. She hesitated, then said, "There's something else. My affair." I remained silent, watching her struggle to meet my gaze. She couldn't do it, and looked down at the table. "Alan, I'm so sorry. I'm ashamed. I didn't know you knew, and when it ended, it was like, within a few days, I started to wake up again. Like I'd been in some kind of dream. And I was so full of horror at what I'd done. So angry at myself. Just furious. And then I realized I was the luckiest woman on earth. I'd done this terrible, unforgivable thing. But it was over, and you didn't know, and I still had my marriage and my children. It was like crashing my car, horribly, because I was reckless, and walking away without a scratch. So I realized that there was only one thing." Liz was interrupted by the sounds of the girls rushing down the stairs into the kitchen, scrambling to catch the school bus as they always did. The room filled with excitement and laughter as they grabbed breakfast and shared their after-school plans. They gave hugs and kisses before racing outside. Once they left, Liz and I exchanged smiles. still feeling the energy from their departure. "We're so blessed," I said, and Liz agreed. "They're amazing kids," she added. "We've been good parents all these years." We continued to smile, and Liz took my hand. Then she asked, "Alan, how did you find out about my secret? Why didn't you say anything?" "No!" I exclaimed firmly. My anger flared up instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. The warmth and closeness from earlier in the morning vanished. I let go of her hand and stood up from the table. "We managed for 8 years without discussing it, and I'm not going to talk about it now." "But sweetheart, we need to—" "What part of no don't you understand, Liz? I have to get ready for work." Without looking back, I walked upstairs to shave and change. The following 3 weeks were difficult for me, Liz, and the girls. They likely grew more confused as their parents showed them love but barely spoke to each other. Liz appeared sad and pleading, while I remained distant and cold. I couldn't resist. When I was away from Liz, at work or the gym, I remained calm. Her past affair happened long ago. I endured it then, moved on, and stayed strong while waiting for her to return. And she did. She cared for me, and I knew it, and for years now, we've been content. As I laid eyes on her, a wave of anger washed over me. Memories of her with Grenier filled my thoughts, images of their passionate moments together. I struggled to maintain a civil conversation with her, only discussing mundane topics like work, the house, or the girls. Whenever she attempted to discuss our past or emotions, I felt an overwhelming urge to end the conversation or leave the room. I found myself enjoying long showers once more, no longer shedding tears, but filled with rage instead. I silently cursed her and imagined various ways to get back at her. The thought of leaving my girls and disappearing, leaving her without any means to support herself, crossed my mind. As for the idea of being intimate with Liz, it was laughable. The mere thought of touching her only served to intensify my anger and jealousy. She knew I seemed distant. My actions made that evident. On a few occasions as we prepared for bed, she softly touched my arm, a silent plea for connection. During our joyful years, I reveled in her interest in intimacy. I appreciated that she too desired me. But now, I simply replied, "No, Liz," without even facing her. She removed her hand and silently lay next to me. A few nights after one of these declines, she anticipated me in bed and spoke up before I could settle in and turn off the light. "Alan, I love you, I miss you, and I want to be close. Can we please?" I was caught off guard. I perched on the edge of the bed and contemplated for a moment. "No," I eventually replied. "I don't want to. I can't even consider our relationship without picturing you and someone else. It makes me angry, and I don't even want to be close to you." Liz, visibly upset, pleaded, "But Alan, that was so long ago. We've been so happy together since then. Please, let me make it up to you." I merely shook my head, avoiding eye contact, and listened to her quiet sobs. After a few minutes, she gathered her bathrobe from the closet and left the room. Exhausted, I climbed into bed and, surprisingly, drifted off to sleep. The next day, around 6:30, I entered a quiet house and found Liz seated at the kitchen table. Her face was weary and sad, with deeper bags under her eyes than I recalled. "Carly and Christina went to Chinese garden. We need to talk alone, Alan." I agreed and sat down across from her. She whispered, "I'm at my wit's end. I love you, and I'm sorry. I don't know how to make it right, or even how to reach you." Reflecting on the past, she added, "When I did that terrible thing with Grenier, you must have been so angry, and you never said a word. Now, 8 years later, it feels like I've lost you. I don't know what to do." I couldn't provide an answer and simply shrugged in response. "Alan, can we find a counselor? I could ask Sarah at the hospital for a suggestion, without revealing the person it's for. She's familiar with the best ones. She's been in her role for quite some time now." I considered this option too. However, it needs to be a male counselor. I want to talk to someone who can potentially understand my feelings, given my situation. "Of course, dear," she responded, visibly relieved. "I'll contact her tomorrow." She placed her hand on mine, and I allowed her to hold it. "Thank you." Sebastian McElroney appeared cheerful, maintaining a youthful demeanor despite his age. He was of average build, with a rosy complexion and a slight jiggle in his cheeks when he laughed. His eyes were attentive, and he listened carefully to every word. Within minutes, it was clear that he was intelligent and knowledgeable in his field. As the conversation began, Sebastian inquired about the purpose of their visit. Liz responded first. I had a secret. 8 years ago, I confided in a friend during a difficult time. I thought my husband never knew about it, and since then, our marriage has been wonderful. I've been really happy. I think we both have. Then a couple of months ago, he thought I was keeping something from him, which I wasn't, and he revealed he knew about the secret from 8 years ago. And since then, Alan's been distant and unhappy. He won't talk to me about his feelings, doesn't want to let me apologize or explain or tell him how I'm feeling, and he won't be with me at all, emotionally, I mean. I care about him and miss him, and I feel guilty as hell, and I don't know what to do. She sat back and dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Alan? Sebastian said. Is that about how you see it? Well, Alan, I managed to handle my anger before. I had a plan to deal with the situation involving Liz's affair, and I followed it, and things turned out all right. But now, since I revealed to her that I knew about her and Richard Grenier, that's the man's name, all the old anger has resurfaced. I can't seem to control it, and I'm constantly mad at Liz. All right, he said after a moment. Liz, could you please explain the affair, how and why you think it happened? We don't need the specific details. And Alan, I kindly ask you not to interrupt until Liz is finished. Then you'll have your turn. Liz shared the story of Carly's leukemia, the struggles, and the eventual relief when she got better. They all tried to get back to normal life, but eventually drifted apart. The unexpected twist was the seduction story involving Grenier. He became friends with Liz, listened to her talk about the challenges they faced, and subtly inserted himself between Liz and her husband, making her believe he was the one she could truly confide in. How long did it last? Sebastian inquired gently. The physical part didn't start for a while, but about 6 weeks, I suppose. We first touched. She turned to me and apologized. Alan. He first touched me in September, and then, well, it ended near the end of October. What happened? Sebastian wanted to know. He ended it. Just called me in the middle of a workday and said it was great. I was fun, but it was over. He was harsh. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. And then, over the next few days, like the biggest fool in the world. She glanced at me. It took a few days for me to regain my senses, realizing how foolish I'd been and how fortunate I was to still have a husband. Recovering from a bad fever, I gradually felt better and more like myself. My family, Alan and the girls, had been there the whole time, waiting for me, even though they didn't know about it. She paused, then shrugged her shoulders. Can you share more about your emotions during the affair and after it ended? Sebastian spoke softly, his expression understanding and warm. While it was happening, I was almost hypnotized. It was like I was two different people, or in two different worlds. When I was with Richard, it was intense. He was skilled, and at first it was thrilling to be with someone new. Our connection was strong. She glanced at me, checking my reaction. I sat there, expressionless, staring at her. I felt empty. When we were together, it was like a whirlwind. During the seduction, she winced. I was swept away, I guess. I thought about him all the time, reliving the moments in my mind. He managed to make himself a part of my life, as if he knew me, became my confidant, my support in a way. She turned to face me. I would never have gotten involved with him just for the intimacy, Alan, not with him or anyone. It wasn't about the intimacy for me, although I could see later that it was only about that for him. The first few times we shared a moment, it was warm and caring. But after that, it quickly changed. It became more about the physical connection. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I thought about it afterwards, I saw that in his mind, I was just someone to connect with, like a friend he didn't have to care for. She looked at the floor. I was such a fool. We waited for her to continue. I felt empty and restless when I was away from him. My thoughts were consumed with confusion as I struggled to understand why I was betraying Alan. Despite my love for him, I knew my actions were unforgivable. It was as if a veil separated me from my emotions, like being under the influence of a numbing agent. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't feel anything. As Alan expressed his concerns about growing apart, I avoided addressing the issue. I made up stories about being tired or swamped with work, pushing everything else aside. I never allowed myself to truly contemplate my actions with Richard or the potential consequences. "And after it was over?" Sebastian inquired. "It was like waking up from a dream," she replied. "Gradually the fog lifted, and within a few weeks I could feel my emotions returning." She hesitated, then admitted, "I felt ashamed. I loved Alan, and I wasn't the type of woman who would cheat on her husband, risking our happy marriage and our children's well-being for a fleeting affair." As time went on, she felt fortunate. Despite her actions, her marriage and life remained intact. Each day, she felt more grateful and committed to making amends with Alan. She longed to love him deeply, to be intimate with him, and to be the wife he truly deserved. Alan had been so understanding and compassionate throughout the ordeal. "I rediscovered myself and deepened my relationship with Alan," she said. "We made time for each other, shared love, and were happy for 8 years. But then, a few months ago, something changed." In therapy sessions with Sebastian, she shared her concerns about Liz. Liz had become distant and vague, occasionally avoiding questions. One day, Liz didn't recognize Richard Grenier, a man she once knew, which left her deeply worried. So I hired a private investigator, and he provided the evidence I requested: pictures and recordings. Liz's expression was a mix of shock and horror as she stared at me. "I never played the tapes," I admitted, "nor did I look at the photos. I knew I couldn't bear to see or hear it." Turning back to Sebastian, I continued, "Just envisioning the situation was difficult enough. The emotions were overwhelming. It was an unforgettable experience in my life. I enjoyed longer showers, cherishing my alone time. I felt overwhelmed, leaning against the wall, tears streaming down my face. My mind wandered, imagining different scenarios, stopping them both, perhaps with a knife or rope, or catching them in the hotel room and parading them naked through the parking lot. I thought about confronting Liz, making her admit her wrongs, especially in front of our children or at a family gathering like Thanksgiving dinner in front of her parents. Liz's complexion paled as if she could sense my thoughts. Sebastian whispered softly, "It must have been a difficult time for you. Yet, you never confronted her or considered divorce. Did you ever think about it?" I chuckled. "I considered leaving with the kids and starting over somewhere else, but I've experienced divorce. My parents split up when I was 10, and it was terrifying. They were so angry they couldn't be parents to my brother and sister and me anymore. They acted like children, and we were stuck in the middle. Years ago, my brother and his wife divorced, and I saw their kids go through the same thing. How could I do that to Carly and Christina, after everything Carly went through with her illness? So, I decided to do everything I could to save the marriage." He replied, "But you could have gone to Liz and told her you knew, insisted she end the affair." I just didn't think that would work. I wasn't sure I could control my anger. I imagined weeks, months of her being all remorseful, trying to make it up to me, and me being so furious I couldn't even speak to her." I smiled wryly. "Sort of like where we are now. Plus," I continued, "I knew I wouldn't be able to believe a word she said. If she told me she loved me or pulled me into bed, how could I trust her? How could I know she really wanted me, as opposed to just hoping I wouldn't throw her out? I knew that I'd have to see what she did, after the misunderstanding, I mean. I'd have to see if, all on her own, she still loved me and wanted me. So I pretended to be happy. I hid my sadness and frustration, only letting it out in the shower. I went to work, came home, and took care of the kids, even occasionally spending time with Liz, though it wasn't truly loving. Liz sat next to me, looking pale and upset. "Your plan was to wait for the other relationship to end without telling Liz?" I questioned. "Would you reveal the truth?" "No," I responded. "I showed Grenier a photo and forced him to call Liz, ending their affair. I was there when it happened." Liz gasped and began to cry. "Sebastian has some thoughts," I shared after 3 weeks of visiting him. Richard Grenier was a skilled seducer, patient and subtle in his approach. He didn't make Liz feel like she was being pursued, instead becoming her friend and confidant first. Despite the circumstances, understanding the situation fully is essential for moving forward. Now, on your side, you made a truly brave choice, Alan. You looked beyond your own pain to think about what your children required, putting their needs first. Though your approach might not have been perfect, it was what resonated with you at the time. It seems your decision had a positive impact, as both of you mentioned that the final years of your marriage were quite pleasant. In the midst of a difficult situation, discovering that someone you care about has betrayed you can be incredibly painful. Learning that they've hidden a major secret from you only adds to the heartache. By taking action, you managed to turn the tables on Liz, revealing a secret of your own and leaving her in the dark. As Sebastian explained, during the challenging period of the affair and its aftermath, your strength came from the knowledge you held over her, giving you a sense of power and control. He leaned slightly forward. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. Instead of the argument driving your family apart, you found a way to keep your marriage alive. It was brave, and a bit clever, actually. But neither of them had mentioned what happened 2 months ago. What changed, Alan? Why did you reveal your secret to Liz after so many years? He explained the situation with Tom K. Bernardo, the weeks of Liz being distant and preoccupied, and how worried he'd become that she was cheating on him again. I still wouldn't have said anything, though, he continued. But I complained to her one morning about all her so-called late meetings, and we got into an argument, and she said something that made me snap in an instant. I shook my head. 8 years of self-restraint, and it all vanished in a single moment. Sebastian whispered, "What did she say?" I responded, "When have I ever given you reason not to trust me?" A long silence filled the room as we all contemplated the situation. The air conditioner hummed softly in the background. Liz admitted, "I remember that now. I'd forgotten the words. But when I said them, in the split second before you replied, I realized what I'd said, and I felt ashamed." I confessed. I couldn't stop myself. I hit her with it, with Grenier, and told her that if she was doing it again, with Bernardo, our marriage was over. I continued, "Then I just got the hell out of there." With that, I concluded the story. At 4:08 on a Tuesday afternoon, I glanced up as my office door opened, surprised to see Carly and Christina entering with their book bags. "Hey, do you have a minute for a couple of relatives?" they asked. "Of course. Come on in and have a seat," I replied, greeting them warmly. They settled into the office chairs, and I inquired, "What brings you here? Your visits are rare." They shared a glance before Christina closed the door. Carly whispered, "Can we talk about you and Mom?" Carly sighed and looked at her dad. "Dad, we know you and Mom aren't doing great. We miss the happiness you used to share. Can't you guys talk to each other and be happy again?" Christina nodded, her eyes wide with concern. Dad took a deep breath. "I promise we're trying, kids. Sometimes grown-up problems are difficult to solve, but we're working on it, and we appreciate your understanding." Carly questioned, "Then why the Cold War, Dad?" She'd been studying 20th century European history. It impressed her. Sometimes relationships have difficult times, Carl. This is a tough one for your mom and me, I won't deny it. But we're working on it, and we'll keep working on it until we've got it sorted out. "But why are you so angry and she's always crying?" he asked. "Honey, I'm not going to discuss the specifics of this with you. It's between your mom and me." I stood up and walked around my desk, squatting down between the chairs, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "I'm sorry that Mom and I aren't getting along so well right now, and I'm even more sorry that it's worrying you. But you have to have a little faith in us. Trust that we'll work through this challenging time together. We both care for you deeply and—" I hesitated. I was about to say, "and we'll always support you, no matter what," but that wasn't the whole truth. "And we're going to find a solution together. Just give us some time." Christina asked, "Dad, please share what's going on. We know you have our best interests at heart, so there must be a significant reason for your long-lasting concern." I sighed and stood up, my legs aching. "I'm sorry, Christina. Some things are better left unsaid." I gently took her arm and guided her into a warm embrace. "I'll take you both to the nearby coffee shop and treat you to a cup of that sweet drink you enjoy." I then promised to leave work early and share the drive home with them, so they wouldn't have to wait for the downtown bus. After quickly saving my work and grabbing my briefcase, I cheerfully led my girls out of the office. I hoped my words brought them comfort, and couldn't help but wonder if any of it was true. Week 5 with Sebastian. Liz, what are your goals? What do you hope to achieve from our time together? I want Alan back, she said simply. I want our strong relationship restored, the one we had at the start and the one we shared for almost 8 years. She turned to me, her eyes searching. But I don't know how to reach him, or what he wants from me. Sebastian looked at me intently. Alan, what do you want? I hesitated, then admitted, I want to move past this mess, reconcile with Liz, and be happy again. But it's just not happening. I'm angry and hurt, betrayed and furious, and it's not getting better. Sebastian thought for a moment. If you could forgive her when the pain was fresh, why not now? After all, Alan, you've gotten what you hoped for. As you yourself told me, she's come back to you, proven her love and commitment time and time again. And you haven't strayed, have you, Liz? Absolutely not. I haven't even looked at another man since Richard. Her voice was firm, and she looked straight at Sebastian and then at me. I believed her. I hesitated. I don't know, Sebastian. I've thought about it a lot, and everything you say is true. Only the past resurfaced because of Tom Bernardo's issue. It was safely in the past, I thought, and then all that pain came crashing down on me again, like being tortured and having to endure it once more years later. I fell silent for a moment. I came across a memoir written by a man who had experienced torture twice. He was a former CIA agent. The first time, he endured 6 days of torture without giving in or revealing any information. He had been trained to withstand such pain. But 4 years later, he was captured and tortured again. This time, he couldn't last more than 2 hours before he started revealing secrets. He explained that having gone through it once and knowing what was to come, he simply couldn't face it again, unable to stand up to the torture a second time. I can understand how you feel. It's tough to see someone you care about hurting others and then expecting you to pick up the pieces. Pausing, they continued. Do you think Liz needs to make amends, or is there something specific you'd like her to do? Liz sat beside me, her eyes red but dry, looking sad. Her head was down, and she didn't meet my gaze. All right, let's focus on you for a moment, Alan. What do you envision your life being like a year from now? He leaned in, curiosity in his eyes. Is Liz still with you? Are things going well? Or are you and Liz no longer together? I sighed. I see us together, with the girls, all of us happy, just like we've been for a while now, until the last few months. He paused. Is that the future you want? Is that the picture you desire to come true? I nodded slowly. Then tell me, what needs to happen? What must Liz do? What must I do? I shook my head, feeling deeply unhappy. I have no idea what needs to occur. On a Saturday morning, Alan took a lengthy shower. He woke up early, prepared coffee, and skipped breakfast. Liz was still in bed, while the girls were asleep. Feeling sad and confused, Alan's thoughts wandered aimlessly. The shower's water continued to pound against him, but his mind remained empty. Suddenly, the shower door opened and closed, revealing Liz, who was naked, and tears streamed down her face. She reached for Alan, saying, Liz, no, However, before he could finish his sentence, she exclaimed, Alan! She embraced him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Liz continued to sob, repeating the same words in his ear. Take me back. Please take me back. She was whispering, her eyes filled with emotion, taking deep breaths and wiping away tears. She clung to me tightly, as if I were her lifeline. She shivered, and without hesitation, I led her to a warm, cozy spot where we could be close. We swayed gently together, her sobs subsiding, her whispers fading. I comforted her with soft touches, noticing her body gradually warming up. When she seemed at peace, I gently pulled away, smiling at her with reassurance. And then, in a tender moment, I shared a gentle kiss with her. She responded with fervor, and we exchanged passionate, fervent kisses as the water continued to pour down on us. When I pulled away, a smile on my face, she broke into tears once more, holding me tighter than ever. I turned off the water, helping us both out of the shower without a word, Liz still clinging to me. Then I carried her back to bed, lying down next to her, gently kissing her and stroking her hair. I rolled her onto her back and placed a tender kiss on her forehead, focusing on the emotional connection rather than the physical. We continued to express our love and affection for each other, moaning softly as we held each other close. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated intimacy. As our passion grew, we continued to embrace and comfort each other, cherishing the warmth and love we shared. It was a truly unforgettable and heartwarming experience. When our breathing calmed, I gently moved closer to her, our bodies touching. We shared a warm smile and a tender kiss, holding each other close. Liz's eyes sparkled with excitement as I whispered, "Let's cherish these moments together, every day." She nodded enthusiastically, her face beaming with happiness, and we continued to embrace as we drifted off to sleep. "Sebastian," I said to his answering machine, "it's Alan Hendricks on Sunday evening. Liz and I are going to reschedule this week's appointments. I'm sure we'll want to come in again, but I don't know when. If you don't mind, I'll give you another call when we're ready to see you. Thanks." The previous night had been eventful. After a quick pizza dinner with us, Carly and Christina went to the movies, and Liz and I headed for the bedroom without a word. We undressed quickly and began sharing a tender embrace. While she stroked my hand, I gently caressed her face. Our eyes locked, and we both knew we were ready to explore each other's desires. As we continued to embrace, I whispered, "I want you to do something." With a nod, she understood, and I said, "Will you let me guide you through a special moment, and let me be there with you?" Her eyes sparkled with anticipation, and we began a journey together, discovering new depths of intimacy and connection. She hesitated, then shyly requested, "Could you please turn off the main light and leave only the bedside lamp on?" Once the room was dimmer, she settled down on the bed, lying on her back. She began to explore her body, moving slowly and smiling at the observer. With one hand, she gently rubbed her chest, while the other hand traced her waist, leading up to her hips. As I sat at the edge of the bed, I subtly caressed my arm, ensuring she could see my actions. She, in turn, focused on her task, her breathing becoming more rapid. Her hand, which had been circling her waist, now zeroed in on her love button, stroking it with increasing speed. Her eyes remained locked on my hand as I continued to stroke my arm. As the tension built, she reached her climax, her body convulsing on the bed, her hips moving in sync with her breath. "Oh, oh, oh, it's—" Her voice trailed off, her fingers slowed, and she smiled up at me dreamily. "Oh, it was—" She reached for me, and I was on top of her in an instant. We shared a passionate embrace, and our hearts raced as we experienced the intensity of the moment together. After a few minutes, our passion subsided, and we lay together for a while, not talking, barely moving. Our hearts continued to beat in sync, and the warmth of our connection filled the room. As we relaxed, I began to gently explore Liz's body with my hands, cherishing the feeling of our closeness and the trust we shared. She leaned in close, her breath gentle against my ear. "I want you to be a part of this moment," she whispered, her voice soft and tender. I could feel her enthusiasm, the warmth of her spirit enveloping me. I smiled, my own eagerness growing. I wanted to share this experience with her just as much as she wanted to share it with me. I reached out, our hands connecting and intertwining. We gazed into each other's eyes, our souls meeting in that moment of connection. We moved together, our minds and hearts in sync, sharing thoughts and emotions. Our breaths came more quickly, our laughter mingling as we reveled in the joy of the experience. As we neared the peak of our shared moment, she whispered, "I want to remember this forever," her voice barely more than a whisper. I squeezed her hand, my body responding to her words, and we both smiled as we cherished the memory together. We sat there, our hands still joined, relishing the warmth of the moment. We looked into each other's eyes, our hearts full of gratitude for the connection we had found. She danced passionately for almost 10 minutes, her movements fluid and intense. They shared a deep connection, their eyes locked as they moved together. At one point, she leaned in for a tender kiss, their lips meeting softly. As the dance continued, they both felt a surge of energy, their hearts racing in unison. When the dance reached its climax, they embraced each other, feeling a sense of completion. It was a night they would never forget, a moment of pure connection and love. The next morning, they woke up early, eager to start the day. And that's how we found a solution, surprisingly enough. The following night was similar, but much calmer, with the girls in their rooms. Liz helped me change and seated me on the bed's edge, then gently offered affection. She gazed into my eyes while performing the act. When I was close to climaxing, I attempted to pull away, but she held me firmly, pressing me into her mouth with her hands on my back until I released my energy. Afterward, she rested on the bed, and I tenderly stimulated her, leading her to 3 delightful moments of joy. The next evening, Liz playfully teased me during dinner, subtly touching my leg while engaging the girls in conversation. Her mischievous grin caught my attention. That night, we shared a passionate and intimate moment in our room, connecting deeply in various ways. Over the next 11 days, we found joy in each other's company, cherishing our time together. On the 5th day, in bed after sharing a special moment, Liz asked, "Should we discuss my past?" I shook my head, smiling. "No need. Sebastian is great, but we're moving forward." She nodded and kissed my chest, snuggling closer. Later, I picked up Christina and her friends at the mall. After dropping them off, she remarked, "You and Mom are getting along better now." I smiled, happy with the progress. She rolled her eyes playfully. "Dad, come on. You and Mom are always so affectionate. It's like you're always on a date." She laughed and added, "I guess you've already got your own special place, huh?" I laughed too, and replied, "Yes, we do. And you know, Chris, marriage isn't always easy. There are ups and downs, but we're working through it together." She responded with a sarcastic smile. "Thanks for the life lesson, oh wise one. I'll be sure to remember that in my book of wise sayings." She laughed again, but I could see the relief in her eyes. 6 weeks later, we visited Sebastian one last time. "Wow, it seems like something good has happened. Care to share the details?" I just grinned. Liz's cheeks turned a little pink, and she said, "We've been spending a lot of quality time together. It's been a few weeks of really special moments, and we still manage to have a few each week. It's like we're back to those blissful early days of our relationship. It's been wonderful, full of love and laughter. It's like the weight of expectations has been lifted, and we're just enjoying each other's company." He looked at me and said, "I can see the change in both of you. Liz looks radiant, and you seem more carefree. It's like you've found a new sense of happiness and peace." I shrugged. "The last time we were here, you asked me what had to happen to improve our relationship, and I had no idea. It turns out it had nothing to do with words. There had been too many words, I guess, too much thinking, and—" I paused. "Not enough connection, excuse me, Sebastian." He smiled. "I've heard the word before." Then he asked, "So it feels okay? No need to return to what we were doing?" Liz and I looked at each other. She shook her head and said, "I don't think so. It just feels like we're in a good place right now, with each other." She reached over to take my hand, and I clasped hers gently. "We know we can always come back again," I said, "but right now, it doesn't feel like we'll need to." At the door, a man greeted us with a firm handshake and a kiss on Liz's cheek. "Good luck," he smiled. "I hope it goes well." "Thanks," we replied.